He brought hot meals to feed the workers who never noticed him, until the day they called security. A man who once saved American soldiers in a desert war zone was mocked like a trespasser on his own grandson's job site. They laughed at his limp, filmed his confusion, and called him a charity case. Until 4 black SUVs rolled up, and everything went silent. That day, one foreman lost his job. A boy saw his grandfather for who he really was, and the city carved a man's name into concrete, not because he asked for it, but because he earned it. Why does it take humiliation for honor to show up? When does silence speak louder than anger? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this move you, please like, share, and subscribe. We need more echoes of quiet strength. Otis Johnson never walked quickly, not since the blast in Kandahar. But that afternoon, his stride was even slower. The sidewalk beside the New Jersey development site was broken and sun-warmed, much like the hands that held the dented food carrier he brought each week. Inside, 2 tuna melts, a bottle of apple juice, and 1 pack of salted peanuts. For Isaac, his grandson who always forgot to eat, Otis didn't expect recognition. He didn't want it. He just wanted the boy to have something homemade. But as he stepped toward the fenced gate, voices rose. "We don't serve here, old man," someone barked. Then came the laughter, sharp, unkind, and far too familiar. A phone camera lifted. "Yo, someone get your grandpa," a young worker snorted. Otis paused, not out of fear. Just fatigue. Not one man stepped forward. And in that heat, with the dust rising, the only thing that burned more than the sun was the sting of being mistaken for nothing. Again, they never saw him in the headlines, never read his name in a ceremony program. Otis Johnson didn't speak of Kandahar, and no one around him ever asked. But there was a time, 20 years back, when chaos ruled the southern desert and a remote trauma unit was surrounded. Rockets had fallen, communications cut. Inside that camp were medics, injured soldiers, and silence where help should have been. The convoy never made it, but Otis did. He drove a battered Humvee straight through open terrain, dodging fire that cracked the ground like thunder. No orders, no backup. Just instinct, and a refusal to let them die. On his first pass, he dragged out a wounded corpsman. The second, a burned translator 2 days to run. The third time, a young Marine, not even 20, clung to him like a child. Otis didn't think, didn't hesitate. He was halfway to the 4th trip when the earth beneath him vanished. The blast hurled him like driftwood in a flood. When he woke, there was no leg below the right knee, no steady breath, only the sterile ceiling of a German military hospital and a quiet nurse who said, "You're lucky." But Otis never believed in luck, just choices. He made his, and it cost him everything, except regret. That he never carried. Otis Johnson didn't live in a big house or in a quiet neighborhood with trimmed lawns and friendly mailmen. His apartment sat above a barber shop and across the street from a check cashing place in Newark. Just a modest 1-bedroom unit with creaky floors, a leaky kitchen faucet, and walls thin enough to hear the neighbors argue about the rent every Sunday night. But to Otis, it was enough. He didn't need more. A man who's had sand in his lungs and shrapnel in his ribs doesn't complain about the hum of an old refrigerator or a broken heater in February. He just fixes what he can and wraps up in a blanket when he can't. Each Thursday, Otis followed the same routine. He'd wake before sunrise, grind coffee by hand, and sit in the window for exactly 12 minutes, watching traffic stumble awake. Then he'd pack the same insulated food carrier he'd used for nearly a decade. 1 sandwich, cut diagonally, a bottle of apple juice, no sugar, a small bag of salted peanuts, and a folded napkin with a handwritten note. "Eat this, and don't skip lunch. Love, Gramps. Always the same ink. Always the same message. Isaac, his grandson, had started working at the construction site across town 6 months ago. 18, fresh out of high school, full of dreams but no compass. His mother had passed when he was 10, and his father, Otis's only son, hadn't stayed long enough to leave anything but a last name. Otis never said much about it. Never pointed fingers. He just stepped in quietly, filling shoes that had been left empty. He never told Isaac how he scraped to pay for his textbooks, or how he skipped medicine some months to make rent. That wasn't the point. You did what needed doing. Period. Otis didn't go to the job site for praise or recognition. He knew the rules. No outsiders past the fence, hard hats only, union site. But every week, he'd walk right up to the edge of the security line and hand the food to whoever was working the gate. Sometimes they nodded, sometimes they didn't. Once, a guard told him, "You're lucky we don't toss you out." Otis just smiled and said, "I've been tossed worse." Then he turned and walked away. That was his way. Inside the apartment, reminders of his past were everywhere, but subtle. A folded American flag on the bookshelf. A photo, half-faded, of a group of soldiers crouched in front of a burned-out convoy. Otis, younger then, with both legs and a crooked grin. A prosthetic leg stood against the wall by the door, polished each morning like it was part of a uniform. It didn't matter that no one saluted anymore. He still stood straight when he wore it. He never kept medals on the walls. Those stayed in a drawer beneath his socks, not out of shame, but because glory fades. What mattered was what you did when no one was watching. That's how Otis lived, quietly, faithfully, without needing applause. On the radio, the announcer talked about traffic delays and rising gas prices. Otis hummed under his breath, wrapped a rubber band around the food carrier, and buttoned his coat. Another delivery, another day, another quiet way to say, "I'm still here, and I still care." The sun was already beating down when Otis reached the edge of the site. Heat rippled above the asphalt, like ghosts rising from the ground. The construction yard stretched wide, concrete slabs stacked like gray tombstones, rebar jutting into the air like broken ribs. Diesel engines rumbled in the distance. Sparks flew as a welder lit his torch. Men in neon vests shouted instructions, some with clipboards, most with sweat-stained brows and rolled-up sleeves. Otis didn't walk fast, but he didn't shuffle either. His limp was steady, earned, not exaggerated. He stepped up to the security line, the same one he'd stood behind every Thursday for the last 6 months. In his left hand, the food carrier. In his right, nothing but time. But this time was different. A new guard stood at the gate, young, pale, fresh haircut. He glanced down at the food container and back up with narrowed eyes. "You lost, sir?" His tone was sharp, not unkind, but clipped, like someone tired of excuses. "No," Otis said softly, nodding toward the interior. "Just dropping lunch for my grandson." The guard hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "This is a restricted site." Otis gave a small smile. "Ain't trying to build nothing, just passing along a sandwich." From behind the scaffolding, voices began to rise. One of the crew pointed toward the gate. "Hey, who's the old man?" Another added, "Yo, Isaac, your grandpa's here again. Tell him this ain't a soup kitchen." The laughter followed, too loud, too practiced. Otis didn't flinch. He'd heard worse in quieter places. A worker leaned over the second-story platform and called out, "That limp real, or just for sympathy?" Otis didn't answer. He didn't look up. He simply adjusted the strap of the carrier and waited. The foreman appeared, white hard hat, clipboard in hand, boots caked with cement. He was thick around the shoulders, with a permanent squint, and the impatience of a man who mistook control for respect. "You can't be here," he barked. "I don't step past the line," Otis said, voice calm. "I don't care if you're standing on the moon. You're not on payroll. You don't belong." He sneered. "Unless you're applying for mascot." More laughter. Otis's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained steady. A phone rose in someone's hand. "Bet TikTok's gonna love this," a young voice snorted. "RoboCop Grandpa delivers again." No one stopped them. No one said a word. And Isaac never came out. Not this time. Across the street, shaded beneath the cracked canopy of an old sycamore, a black SUV idled quietly. Windows tinted, engine low, nothing about it demanded attention, except the man inside. Dean Harrell sat behind the wheel, one hand resting on the steering column, the other curled into a loose fist on his knee. He watched everything. The sunburned foreman pacing, the young workers laughing, the camera phone rising like a weapon. But most of all, he watched Otis Johnson, limping, steady, unmoved. It had been almost 2 decades since Dean had seen him in person. Last time, there'd been sand in the air and blood on Dean's uniform. He remembered the way Otis had run into the smoke, not once, not twice, but 3 times, hauling men out of a collapsing aid station while gunfire cracked overhead like snapping bones. Dean had been one of them. A lieutenant then, barely 30, his leg shattered and fading fast. He never saw who pulled him out. Not until they were both laid side by side on a cold transport floor, and Otis even then was still checking to see who else made it. That image never left him. Dean had moved on. Awards, promotions, even a short stint at the Pentagon. But no medal ever felt heavier than the silence he carried. Knowing the man who saved him never once stood on a stage. Never asked to. Never would. And now here he was again, standing still while the world around him mocked his limp and ignored his story. Dean felt a shift. Not rage, not even sorrow. Something quieter. Sharper. The kind of thing that hums beneath your skin when something sacred is being insulted. He rolled his sleeve halfway up his forearm, just enough to see the faded ink. A seal trident, wrapped with a date, etched in silence, remembered in pain. Beneath it, a scar the length of a pocket knife, still faintly raised. Kandahar. That day, that man. He didn't reach for his phone right away. He just stared a moment longer, the noise from the construction site muffled behind glass. Otis had never asked anyone to defend him. That's what made it worse. Dean reached slowly into the glove box, pulled out a secure phone, and dialed a number only 5 men still had. "It's Harrell," he said, voice firm but steady. "Send the convoy. No questions." Then he ended the call and placed the phone gently on the seat beside him. Outside, the laughter continued. But inside that SUV, something had already begun to move. Something older than anger and far stronger than pity. Something that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Respect. The rumble came slow and low, too clean, too even to be a cement mixer. Heads turned. 4 black SUVs rounded the corner in tight formation, moving with precision no civilian convoy ever bothered to fake. They didn't honk, didn't flash lights. They simply rolled forward like they owned the pavement. When they reached the front of the construction site, they stopped as one, blocking the gate entirely. A hammer dropped. Somewhere on the scaffolding, a cigarette went out mid-drag. No one spoke. No one moved. The driver doors opened first, then the back. 7 men stepped out. not in full uniform, but the message was clear. Black tactical pants, fitted dark shirts, boots polished to a quiet gleam. Some wore sunglasses. None smiled. They moved like a single organism, silent and assured, with the kind of posture that doesn't ask permission. It announces presence. Dean Harrell led them, his salt and pepper hair cropped close, sleeves rolled just high enough to reveal the seal trident inked on one arm. He said nothing as he walked. He didn't need to. The silence followed him like gravity. The foreman, who minutes earlier had puffed out his chest like a rooster, now stood oddly still, clipboard slack in one hand. His lips moved, but no sound came. Dean stopped 2 feet from him and spoke, quiet and deliberate. "Who just humiliated Mr. Otis Johnson?" The man blinked. I didn't know he was a veteran," Dean interrupted. "A man who ran into a burning medical tent to save my life? A man who lost his leg doing what you've likely never done? Something right, under fire?" The air thickened. One of the younger SEALs stepped forward and held up his phone. "We recorded everything," he said flatly. "From the gate. Every word. Every laugh. Every insult." Murmurs rippled. A few workers looked down. One took off his hard hat without even realizing it. The foreman tried again. "It was a joke. We didn't mean any." Dean didn't blink. "You mocked a man who didn't ask for applause, who never once cashed in on his sacrifice, who stood quietly while you turned his pain into content." He stepped closer, voice lower. "That ends now." No one argued. No one dared. Behind him, the SEAL stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes forward, not as enforcers, but as witnesses. A reckoning had arrived, and it wasn't loud. It was quiet, controlled, undeniable, like justice that had waited long enough. Otis hadn't moved. He was still standing by the gate, the food container in his hand, his shoulders square but low, like someone used to bearing weight no one else sees. He didn't know what had happened behind him. Not yet, but he felt it. The shift in air, the sudden stillness. Then came the footsteps. Steady, unrushed, purposeful. He turned. Dean Harrell approached alone, the others remaining behind like a wall of silence. Otis looked up, eyes narrowing just slightly. Not in suspicion, but recognition. Dean stopped a few feet away. His voice, when it came, was softer than before. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Otis gave a faint nod, not out of formality, but out of something older, mutual respect. Dean reached into the pocket of his vest and pulled out a small, circular object. It caught the light, a Brotherhood coin, engraved with the SEAL insignia. Dean held it out between both hands. "You earned this years ago," he said. "But you were too busy saving lives to ever receive it. I was one of them." Otis didn't speak. He looked down at the coin, then up again. No need for words. His hand reached out, slow but certain, and closed around it. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, behind Dean, the 6 other SEALs raised their hands in perfect unison, a salute. Not casual, not performative, the kind reserved for warriors. For those who led by example, not by rank. Otis hesitated, then returned it. Crisp. Clean. Muscle memory. But this time it felt earned. A hush settled around them. Even the phones lowered. Even the ones who mocked just minutes ago stood still. And for the first time in a very long time, Otis Johnson stood not as a shadow on the fringe, but as the center of a truth no one could deny. By nightfall, the video had made its rounds. First, a shaky clip on TikTok, Otis standing at the gate, the insults flying, the laughter loud. Then the silence. the black SUVs, the men stepping out. And finally that moment, 7 salutes held high, and one old man returning it without flinching. No caption could compete with the image. No filter could sharpen what was already clear. Dignity doesn't age, and silence doesn't mean weakness. Within hours, the footage spread like wildfire. Reddit threads debated whether the crew should be fired. Twitter posts split into camps, some praising the SEALs for stepping up, others questioning why it took their presence for respect to show up at all. One user wrote, "So we only honor our vets if they come with backup now?" Another replied, "Respect shouldn't need uniforms to be real." The arguments piled in, but so did the views. 10 million by midnight, 20 by morning. News outlets picked it up next. Vietnam vet, honored after public humiliation. The headline was wrong, but the message was strong. Dean had clarified in a short interview. Otis served during the War on Terror. But it doesn't matter when or where. Some men earn reverence with action, not noise. And through it all, Otis said nothing. No public statements. No press, no interviews. He stayed home. Made coffee, polished his prosthetic, folded his grandson's napkin. But something changed. The foreman was pulled from the project and reassigned. The company issued a formal apology, posted across all platforms. Comments flooded in. "Do better. That man is the reason your job even exists. How many others have we overlooked?" Otis never read them, but Isaac did. And for the first time, he looked at the man who raised him not just with gratitude, but with pride. A week later, something new appeared at the edge of the construction site. No press release, no ribbon cutting, just a quiet addition. 1 brick, laid flat into the ground near the main gate. It was framed by a polished steel plate, encased in fresh concrete, and engraved with only 6 words. "Fed with dignity, Otis Johnson." No spotlight, no fence around it, just a brick in the open, where every worker would pass by at the start and end of each shift. At first, no one said much. A few glanced down. Some walked around it out of awkwardness, unsure what to do. But one morning, a welder knelt beside it and brushed dust off the edge. Another worker placed a folded note beside it. For the one who never stopped showing up. Isaac saw it too. He walked past it every day now, carrying his own lunch, the way his grandfather had always done for him. One afternoon, during a safety meeting, the site supervisor asked if anyone had questions. Isaac raised his hand. His voice didn't tremble. "I don't have a question," he said, "but I'd like to say something." Heads turned. Silence settled. "That man," Isaac continued, nodding toward the gate, "didn't just bring me food. He taught me what it means to do the right thing, even when nobody's clapping. Even when it costs you." No one clapped. No one needed to. From then on, the brick wasn't just a symbol. It was a checkpoint. Some workers tapped it like a habit. Others nodded. A few paused to whisper something to themselves before walking on. It became, in its own quiet way, a new foundation. Not for the building going up behind the fence, but for the people putting their hands to it. Something had changed, and it started with a sandwich, a limp, and a man who never asked for more than to be let in. On a quiet Sunday morning, long before the machines roared to life and the steel beams groaned under pressure, Otis Johnson sat on a worn bench in Military Park. Across from him, Dean Harrell sipped his coffee slowly, both men watching the city wake up. Pigeons pecked at crumbs. A jogger passed without noticing them. The world moved on, as it always did, but something between them lingered. A history unspoken, a bond forged not in words, but in smoke, blood, and silence. Dean glanced at Otis, then down at the Brotherhood coin now dangling from a simple chain around Otis's neck. "You never wanted to be a symbol," he said quietly. Otis gave a half shrug, the kind that carried more weight than a speech. "I just didn't want my grandson eating junk." Dean chuckled under his breath. Then he nodded. Funny how the smallest things end up saying the most. Across the park, Isaac approached with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Otis and sat beside him. No fanfare, just a quiet gesture, repeated now each weekend. 3 generations, 1 bench. Later that day, a teacher from the local high school stopped by the job site with her students. She didn't point at the cranes or the steel framework. She pointed at the ground, at the brick, and told them a story, not just about a war hero, but about a man who showed up when it mattered, even when no one was watching. And as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows over the job site, the last words of that story lingered. Honor doesn't always come with a medal. Sometimes it shows up wearing worn boots, carrying a paper bag, and asking nothing in return. The world may never know every Otis Johnson. But if we're lucky, if we're really listening, we'll recognize them when they walk by. And maybe, just maybe, we'll remember that the foundation we stand on isn't just concrete or steel. It's the quiet strength of those who came before us, asking for nothing but the chance to keep walking.